Thanks for the work that you're doing to be able to continue to be able to protect the civil liberties of all Americans and for your service to the country. We are grateful as a nation to be able to have folks that are actually engaged in these ideas. All of us who flew on a plane during the time of COVID remember full well the experience of the mask on, mask off. I will never forget a particular flight that I was on that literally the flight attendant patrolled up and down the aisle the entire time like a prison guard, watching for anyone that lowered their mask at any point or that got on to children who were with a pacifier or with someone who was a crying baby, and to try to figure out some way to be able to cover that up. This is bizarre to be able to think about that, but to be able to think about our own government at the time was also trying to find people that disagreed with policy during that time period and would say, we want to try to find some way for you just not to fly because you disagree with us. Becomes an entirely different level. So for Mr. Crider, let me ask you a question on this. And Mr. Levitt, if you want to be able to jump in as well, you can on this. Did TSA, how did they make decisions regarding the threat level of individuals on the mask mandate issue? Did they have a ranking for that? How did they determine what is the level of threat for an individual?
Okay. We don't know, and that's the problem. It's because things like this are secret, right? They're not the sort of thing that everyday Americans have insight into. They're not the sort of thing that air marshals, even flying back and forth in these flights, have insight into, and they're clearly not the sort of things that you have insight into.
Right.
So it begs the question then, who is writing this stuff, and how are we supposed to trust that it's, it has any basis? Clearly, people just expressing a concern about masks is outrageous for them to be put on a watch list.
Yeah. So going back to some of the things Mr. Abe was saying, someone who's visiting family in Pakistan, someone who was a missionary that was flying back and forth to a country that was deemed inappropriate to be able to fly back and forth to, was there a process to be able to actually have a human engaged in that decision-making to say, hey, this person's visiting family members, this person was a missionary, whatever it may be? Was there a human involved in that, or is it just a trigger, you were in a certain city at a certain place, so you're out, you're on the list?
Again, I can only testify to my wife's situation. I had specific knowledge she didn't enter the Capitol. How she got on that list, who said that she entered the Capitol, I don't know. That's well above our access.
I'll add to that. The TSA has tried to say this is just a rule-based program, right? And they give the impression almost that like some computer is just assessing, flight bookings and then spitting these out. But someone made the decision to put, for instance, Tulsi Gabbard's congressional photo on there rather than her passport photo. There was an individual involved, and frankly, someone needs to figure out who that is and ask them a lot of questions.
Yeah. Well, there's other members of Congress that have also been placed on the list as well on it. Just we don't know why or what the reason was. It was just they're a threat, and so they've got to be able to be on this list. TSA has policies that prohibit active collection of information about people. TSA is a receiver of information, not a collector of information. This is clearly TSA trying to be able to collect information. Was TSA in violation of the law? Because they're not managing information giving to them, they were shifting into the collection mode.
I mean, I'll take a stab there. I don't know. TSA has broad authorities, right? And so they don't treat this as intelligence, right? They don't say that it's intelligence as though they observed you doing something. They're just deploying the assets. So I think back to one of the points that's been made here, Congress has given TSA pretty broad authority. That might need to be looked at being constrained more further.
Mr. Sharper, you want to be able to add to that?
Yeah, I won't be able to cite you chapter and verse, but the authorities in the Air Transportation Security Act are very broad. And so it's your intuition is correct that TSA should not be an intelligence collection agency, but if it decides it's going to go off in that direction, the language is so broad it can go off in that direction. That's why one of my recommendations is to bring TSA and other DHS authorities within bounds that Congress sets tightly.
Sharper, you had also mentioned something about a right to travel, and to clarify that. Tell me what you mean by that.
Well, I think we intuitively feel we have a right to travel. And there are cases from the Supreme Court that say, of course, you've got a right to travel. You can move from one state to another, and they can't deny you welfare benefits when you get there. There are other cases where a man in San Francisco wanted to fly to Washington, D.C. to meet with his representative. And in this case, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals found that you don't have a right to travel on your preferred mode of transportation. He didn't want to go through all the security nonsense, and so challenged there. Said, no, you can take a train or you can drive if you want to go to Washington, D.C. A clear right to travel. Americans believe they have it, but the courts haven't accorded it to them, would give them a position when they went to court where they could do discovery. And some of these things could be turned up. We could learn more about the programs. I think courts would balance well. Obviously, a court is not going to throw out a program that is provably cost effective. And they'll say, yeah, no, in this case, you do have this right, but the right is subject to regulations that allow for security. But the right does not give way to regulations and programs that don't do anything. The regulations and programs that don't actually produce cost-effective security. So that idea, I'm glad you asked about it. I'd like to give it more consideration. Congress can weigh in on that and say, well, no, this intuition of Americans that is somewhat backed by courts can be made a full right. We think it is in Congress. Let's have the courts treat it as such.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
When I traveled, during the pandemic, we all travel several times a week. There were many flight attendants who were very